Good
Hello,
morning.
hello. Good morning.
Wake up, America. Welcome to For the Record. We have a treat in store for you today. Wrong way.
Maybe.
Mhm,
That remains to be seen.
mhm.
We're not scared of addressing some of the more controversial topics in true crime. So, take it away.
Well, topic today, I guess, is going to be the death penalty, and we have a special guest here with us who happens to also have my name as well. So that means I know he's going to be good. We got Steve Gosney here, and he is considered to be an expert in his field. Jody, I guess if you
Absolutely.
want.
Yep.
Yeah.
He's board certified criminal defense attorney, qualified death penalty appeals lawyer in the state of Florida. He's trained in capital punishment and jury selection, has assisted the capital punishment trial team, and if that wasn't enough, he's also the author of multiple books, 3 of which have been specifically dedicated to the death penalty. Welcome, Steve. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you. And I'm already reading your chat. I have a number of other books. One of them is about a hydroponic system, which I do. And
That'll be Udahef, is it? Yes, I told you.
yeah. So thank you.
Talk
Yeah.
about that.
I've still got that. I've actually incorporated. You can buy that book as a standalone, but I've incorporated that into the 3rd edition of my book called "Prepare: The Handbook for Individual Freedom," which is the book about my personal philosophy. But it's quite a unique book. I will say it's kind of a self-help book. It's the Handbook for Individual Freedom. Prepare. And it's developing the ideal Christian mindset. So,
Yeah.
oh, well, thank you. That's so nice. She's binge watching my stuff. But if you get Prepare 3rd edition, you'll get the hydroponics plans in the thing. It's a system designed to be inexpensive, independent, large capacity for growing food off grid.
Jeez,
So
you've got your finger in a few pies, haven't you?
I do it. I've got all kinds of stuff. I got a children's book.
Wow.
My next book's coming out is going to be my 2nd children's book, and just all kinds of stuff. But yeah, the death penalty stuff, it's what I did for many years. And so,
did it draw you to it? Like, were you interested in that field, or did it just happen that way?
well, here's the way that does. It's an interesting question. I was in civil practice for 6 years. And I basically, there's 2 sides of law. One is litigation, and the other is transactional. And I'm clearly a litigator developing that. And as I was doing my civil practice, I found that I actually got kind of afraid of the courtroom because most of the time you're in the office doing motions, and that's just deadly as a civil litigator. So I said, I need to get into trial and get trial practice. So I went to the prosecutor's office.
Yep.
I prosecuted for 6 years. And then I went to the public defender's office and I did that work for 14 years, including appeals. I got like you said, I board certified in criminal trial law. So that was it was sort of a sojourn into criminal law, was to get my trial chops up. Now, of course, as I got into it, I found that, I was in line to be a capital prosecutor. So I was going to prosecute death penalty cases under a fellow named John Tanner. John Tanner was my mentor, or the guy that I was friendly with back in Daytona Beach. He actually was known for prosecuting Eileen Wuornos, the female serial killer.
Yep.
I know that one. Yep.
That's
I know who that is.
If you watch that
trial,
her. If you watch that trial, John Tanner, my mentor, was the lead prosecutor on that case. So. Yeah, and so I was 60-40 for the death penalty. I wasn't like hair on fire for it, but I was like, kind of my level of understanding. I was like, I guess I'm for the death penalty, right? And I'm no problem. So I was moving forward. And then of course, let me see how to say this. There was a change of thing, and I went over to the defense side, and then I realized that. Being a defense attorney, I didn't realize that most lawyers did not practice law like I practiced.
What way?
Well, when I would deal with defense attorneys, I would always say, okay, you've got law and you've got facts. Excuse me, law and facts. So, do we disagree on the law? Or do we disagree on the facts? That's the job, and my job is to formulate where do our disagreements are. Let's see how resolve it, get the case. I didn't realize that when I was in the trial division of the public defender's office, I didn't have one discussion with a prosecutor over law and facts. It was all about power.
Oh.
If you don't do this, then I will do something bad. If you file that motion to suppress, then I'm going to ask for prison time. If you don't do this, I'm going to add this charge. It was all about power, and it was like, well, that has nothing to do with justice. And I was quite shocked about that. And of course, then I became Catholic.
Is this in Florida still?
Yes.
Yep.
And then I became a Catholic in my religious beliefs. And then for a long time, my evolution kind of was moving this way. And I saw all the bad behavior on prosecutors, what they would do. And then my faith started educating me, and I started looking at it with a different eye, started seeing the injustice and wrongful convictions. And oh my goodness.
7%.
Yes. And then
sorry.
Well, we'll get into that a little bit,
sorry.
But then, so this is a long answer to a short question. And then I had a holdout position where I was 99% against the death penalty, but I still had a couple exceptions. And then I threw in the towel and I said, you know what? There is no perfect solution here. And you have to recognize if there was an easy, perfect solution, there wouldn't be a debate, right?
Yep.
But there is no magical solution, and any solution we come up with will be imperfect and will have flaws. And so,
well, we're human.
That's what happened. So now I'm 100% against. But I understand both sides, and I've been on both sides.
Well, the way you've explained it in your books, you've done it very well. That you present both sides very evenly and very fairly and very factually. I was actually flabbergasted. I didn't realize the complexities that were involved in the actual process itself, having watched and, streamed death penalty trials. Didn't think any more of it. Didn't think any further than that. But the knock-on effect that the legislature has and the mandated appeals and the whole process and the length of time, it just fascinated me.
Well, another thing is that too, doing in criminal law, I prosecuted and defended sex crimes too, right? And I hated that. I mean, I would say so. And really, in order to kind of advance in the prosecutor's office, you either have to do death, violence, and guns, or sex crimes. And so I was like, I want nothing to do with those sex crime cases. So I invested my time into firearms cases, violence, and death and murder. So
you get on. Do you know Ian Runkle? You get on well with him.
Oh yeah.
Now, Steve, do you have an opinion? Do you have an opinion on Florida's attempt to try to make the death penalty, make sex crimes against children eligible for the death penalty? Do you think that was?
Well, I'm against the death penalty in all cases. So now I'm the max. And let me just clarify that. The maximum penalty I believe the state should be able to impose against its citizens is life in prison without the possibility of parole.
I agree with that.
So many people who hear somebody say I'm against the death penalty think that, I want to let the murderers go free. Absolutely not.
Right.
No, but I'm just saying that the maximum penalty the state should impose is life in prison without the possibility of parole. Now, I will say, so I would be against that as a matter of principle, as laid out in my book. Now, also, I would say that Florida's attempt to widen the death penalty to include other crimes, specifically non-homicide crimes against children, is explicitly not allowed under the United States Constitution. And there's a case called Kennedy out of the United States Supreme Court, which says that. So the Florida's that law is unconstitutional as written, and they know
the 1976 one in Georgia.
I think so. I thought it was Louisiana, but I'd have to look at my book. But it's actually in death penalty designs. It lays out, and the legislature knows it too. It's a political game.
So do you think my theory on it was that they believe the makeup of the United States Supreme Court may be more open to overturning Kennedy, and that they're looking to get a case there, because that's what I heard. Was that they know it's going. They know it's going there, and then this will give them the opportunity to overturn that, and then widen this and create precedent for this to expand past Florida, which is concerning.
No, that's exactly right. That's what they're doing, is they're seeking to test, with the current makeup of the U.S. Supreme Court, they're seeking to test that decision for better or worse. I'm going under the modern framework, which is really since about 1976, the current framework of the death penalty in the United States. Really, it was wiped out, and then it was reinstated under a case called Gregg out of Georgia, and so the reinstatement, there's a framework. There was a very good reason it was struck down, and then the legislatures responded by putting together a framework that addressed the Supreme Court's concerns, and that was what was approved of in Gregg. Now, in order to get against Kennedy, I think you would have to almost wipe out all of the precedent, all the way back through Furman. Furman is the landmark case that basically brought in, I would say, the modern era of capital punishment in the United States.
Capital punishment.
So that law in 76, was that the one that basically gave you clarity on dividing life without parole?
Well, let's talk about that. Okay, so
Yeah.
and this is
How do
very
you
much
define the difference?
this is laid out in Death Penalty Designs, which is my third book, Maximum Due Process. Okay, so what was Furman about? Furman is a ridiculous decision. If you try to read it, it's impossible to read. Nobody agreed with anything. But the commonality that overturned the death penalty in the United States under Furman was that it was arbitrarily applied. So what does that mean? That means that if you laid out a series of cases in front of you, you should be able to distinguish between the death penalty cases and the non-death penalty cases, right? Which ones are eligible and which ones are not.
Mm-hmm.
And the death penalty should be reserved for the worst of the worst. Okay, so that was the thread that provided for overturning of the capital punishment. In Gregg, they addressed the Georgia legislature then responded, because it was Furman v. Georgia. Legislature responded because, boy, we love the death penalty, right? And they said, okay, in order to reduce arbitrariness, we're going to make a list of aggravators that have to be present in a murder case in order for it to be constitutional. I've always been proposing as a thought experiment, as an anti-death penalty guy, if you're for the death penalty and you want a constitutional aggravator system, make one aggravator. And the one aggravator is multiple homicides.
Multiple victims.
So that way, if I've got a case here, okay, this one's one murder, doesn't apply, death penalty doesn't apply. Here's more than one murder, I proved two murders, two first-degree murders, death penalty applies. Okay, so
how did they determine that before 76?
It was arbitrary.
Oh.
It was arbitrary. It was basically at the whim of the jury, the prosecutor. It was a combination. It was very, very sloppy. And that's what, and Judge Marshall's opinion in Furman, if you want to know about the history and the arbitrariness, is really good. He lays it out about how arbitrary it is in his concurring. I think he's in a concurrence. Yeah, Judge Marshall is in a concurrence and talks about it. And he is a brilliant mind who was on the Supreme Court, if you know Justice Marshall. And his concurrence is, I'd say, the most worthwhile opinion in Furman. Some people, and the judges were all over the place. But Gregg is the legislature's response was to create an aggravator system, and the aggravator, and then mandatory Supreme Court review. So there's an aggravator system, there's mandatory, and that reduces arbitrariness, and that was allowed, that was approved.
And that's even if, sorry.
Mm-hmm.
So you would agree, Steve, then that essentially, one of the arguments against that I'll hear death penalty people make is the cost of keeping that prisoner and everything. But in essence, the Supreme Court created a system that when you apply the death penalty, it almost costs more to the states because of all the appeals and all the extra things. And if you just put somebody in prison for life without parole, because then you've just got the cost of housing that prisoner. But by the time you get there, they're housed in a separate unit. You've got all these appellate lawyers that they're entitled to. You've got this whole process of review. You've got several reviews. The resources that you're expending, the prosecutors are doing extra, or at least, on behalf of the state, that you've got all these extra things. So in and of itself, it certainly doesn't, to me, seem effective at all in the sense of, what's the point? Why do we? And then you have a prosecutor argue in court on a daily basis that they try to argue against what reasonable doubt is, and they make the argument it's not all doubt. I mean, it's reasonable doubts, but it's not every doubt. So we're going to kill someone. The state's going to be sanctioned to kill someone when the prosecutors themselves try to argue to juries that the standard of doubt isn't absolute, but yet we're going to go and be comfortable offing someone and not be able to correct a problem down the road 30 years if we figure out that there was a mistake. Obviously, we can't give them back their 30 years,
back, is there?
But at least we haven't taken their life. So that's why, to me, that's my big problem with the death penalty is actually we don't have an absolute system.
Well, that's and you've touched on a couple points there. One is the cost of the cost of the system. The second is the possibility of error, and actually, I would say that is the problem of error is probably the main one of the main issues I have against the death penalty, and it's because most people see it, and what'll happen is people say, well, you would agree that this guy, this terrorist that just mowed down, he deserves a death penalty, right? And so, okay, what if I say, well, yes, but to get that guy the death penalty, you also have to incorporate the guy who's actually innocent who gets put on the death. Who I actually interviewed a fellow named Herman Lindsay, who was on Florida's death row for 3 years and was exonerated. And if you go back to my channel, you can listen to his story. We've had multiple people who've been exonerated off of death row. Now, you have to take it as a system, because in order to get the death penalty over here, you also have to allow the prosecutors to impose it over here. And as a Christian, our one of our primary duties as a Christian is to defend the innocent. And in fact, the possibility of killing an innocent person, to me, outweighs the need for vengeance against the murderer when we have an option of life in prison without parole. There's a number of other permutations. As far as the cost issue, I find the cost issue, and the death penalty debates lays out all of the arguments on either side. There's about 10 arguments identified on the pro side, and 19 on the other side. The cost issue I put on both sides because I think it's a wash. And the reason is because I don't want to be a partisan. My understanding, and the best research that I've been able to find, is it's about 4 times as costly to put somebody in a death chamber than it is to put them life in prison without parole. Okay, if I'm being fair to myself and honest. But I also have to recognize I have bias. I'd say that even the pro-death penalty people, the best that they can say is that it's an equivalent cost. So to me, it's a wash. And I don't think cost should be the determining factor.
I don't know what that is. With the jury selection, obviously there's special training for that, and jury selection, we saw in Sarah Boone, takes forever. Does it extend that process a lot? Like, is there any specific sort of things that you need to address with to find a non-biased jury? Like, is it a lot harder to do?
Is yes on all counts. Number one is I'm. It's tough because on the one hand I have my anti-death penalty hat, but then I also have my technician hat, right? As far as what is required. So should I be suggesting how to improve the process to make it more resilient against attack from people who are pro-death penalty, or should I want to improve the system marginally so that it's more fair? I don't know. I mean, but I will just give you my honest answer since I'm out of it anyway, and that is the death penalty. The jurors should be individually questioned about their positions on the death penalty, and death penalty designs talks about jury selection. Okay, this book talks about the process of jury selection and what is required of somebody who is a death penalty qualified juror, which is different than any other case. Because if they are saying, and you'll get extremes. I would never, for me, I would not be a qualified death penalty juror because I am 100% against it, and I would never impose it in any case. There's the other extreme. There's people that think that anytime you kill an innocent child, for example, then they should be put in death. There's no other penalty, right? If they're guilty of that, then they should be dead.
Yep.
Those people are also not qualified.
I learned that in chat very quickly.
Right. So you've got these extremes. And so how do you vet those people? You don't have that question in other cases because, see, in a death penalty case, the jurors are the sentencers. Okay.
But don't
That,
they get a chance to appeal again after the jury have made their decision to present more aggravators to the judge outside the presence of the jury?
repeat
Is
the
that
question?
um, I thought I read somewhere that once the jury had deliberated and in the sentencing phase and come up with a verdict, the defence was then able to still put forward more aggravators outside the presence of the jury to the judge.
Not aggravators, only
Mitigators.
mitigators.
Okay,
Okay, so the jury must, well, in Florida we've changed this, but
it's
the
8 to
jury
4,
must
isn't it?
find, yeah, which is also unconstitutional.
Yep.
But the jury must find beyond a reasonable doubt aggravators and must recommend death to the judge, must sentence the judge. Now the judge can, if the jury comes back with a life verdict, the judge can't overrule that. It must be life. If the
Yep.
jury comes back death, then you have something called a Spencer hearing in Florida. And in that case, that you can present additional mitigators that may not have jury appeal, but are actually mitigating. And the judge can overrule the jury in a death case and give life. I actually had a appeal like that where the state had sought the death penalty, and it was a guy who killed an infant son, and they death penalty. Jury came back with death. There was a Spencer hearing, and the judge overruled, gave life. So I mean that can happen, but it can't go the other way. The jury can't say life, and then the judge says death.
Because
Now,
they're unlimited, aren't they? They can bring up whatever and how many times, how many mitigators they want.
Well, and then the yes, mitigation is anything. So, for example, like extreme cocaine and drug abuse since childhood. Okay, most jurors are not impressed with that mitigator.
right.
All right. However, it does reduce culpability, and in fact, it can't be used as a not guilty thing. You can't say I was out of my mind on drugs.
Yeah.
But it can be used as mitigation, and whether you present that to a jury or not, that may be something you'd leave to a Spencer hearing, for example. Now, and sometimes there's tactical things, like, for example, maybe there was some marital, like say it's a man killed his wife or something. Maybe there was a bunch of stuff that she did to him, but as a defense attorney, you don't want to, quote, blame the victim when there was some brutal murder. So you avoid that. But then at the Spencer hearing, you say, yes, but look at the abuse that she put on him, right? So that's the kind of stuff that you might put at a Spencer hearing. That the jury, if you try it with a jury, they'll be like, you're just blaming the victim. How dare you, right? But then when you add it into the, you present it to the judge, it is actually mitigation.
Yep. So do you think that the death penalty does, is it justice? Do you achieve justice?
No.
No, I don't believe so either.
No, I mean,
Now, well,
that's
do you
easy. That was
think
an easy
that? Do you think that? Do you think that the need to have a death qualified juror, in essence, starts to potentially conflict with the presumption of innocence of the defendant because you're
Yes.
eliminating people. I mean, again, most courts hold the presumption of innocence at the highest level, at least from what I've seen, and do everything to protect it. Yet when we do a death qualified juror, we're eliminating people that would be more apt for innocence.
Yep,
I mean,
Steve, that is a very, very good question, and there is
gold star.
There is an argument, and I can't say that I've researched it enough to know or to have a strong opinion on it. But there is a thread of defense attorney thinking and prosecutor thinking that they ask for the death penalty because they want the more pro-guilt jury that a death penalty qualification implies. All right. And then therefore they ask for death jury even so that they get their guilty verdict. And then they just say, out to hell, we don't really care about the sentence. We're just using the process to get a pro-state, pro-guilt jury. And I think that that's an interesting argument. And that's a problem because there's a sort of an equal protection issue there. There's a lot of threads of issues there. And that is something that there's been some research. I'm not the guy to answer that definitively. But that's one of those things that I've wanted to research and haven't had really the time or ability at.
Well, I was just curious. My next question was going to be, how do you know if there's if that's a plan of attack that's being used or actively being used to attempt to, because I mean that would be a potential argument, I think, to say this is why we should get rid of it altogether. I know under Furman it was about the arbitrary application of the death penalty, but then when you look and you say, well, is there a way to apply the death penalty without eroding the presumption of innocence? And if the answer to that question is no, then by form of the Constitution and the existence of the presumption of innocence, the death penalty would never be constitutional because of the requirement to have to qualify a juror as a death qualified juror, unless the prosecution want to eat the pill and say, well, you want to offer the death penalty, then you have to have jurors who are not willing to apply. And to me, that should be that should be it.
Well, there's an argument in Death Penalty Designs, and this is the book that categorizes arguments against the death penalty that you should be making as a lawyer and as a defense lawyer. Okay. And one of those arguments is an equal protection argument towards the jury. Okay. And for the example, I am a Catholic, and I'm a faithful Catholic, and I believe in the Catholic position. So, but as a faithful Catholic, I am struck because of my religious beliefs from serving on a jury. It's my right as a citizen of the United States to sit on juries. And for me to be struck because of my religious views, to me, strikes me as unconstitutional. So that is a very good argument.
What is it?
It's not the thing. The people, yes, it is, and it's based on my religious beliefs. Now, I will say that the people get confused about juries because they think that it's the defendant's right to have the jury of their peers, right? So they think, well, on my rights as a defendant who's the accused. But see, that's the wrong perspective. When you start talking about these jury strikes, it's the individuals on the jury's rights that are being violated. And that is a very good argument, I think, for striking the death penalty.
That's a good point.
Do you want to touch on the aspects of maximum due process and why it's necessary?
Well, and yeah, because due process is, and I love that justice is a process, right? That is exactly right. And there's levels of process, right? So it's like we have due process. Well, how much process is due? Well, if you get a speeding ticket, very little process. If you get a misdemeanor, there's some process, right? And if they if they have the threats of jail, you get a jury trial on a misdemeanor. If you go to felony land, now you're talking some serious process, right? How much process should be due when the state seeks the ultimate sanction, which is death? Well, maximum due process. And that's the title of the book, about maximum due process. And one of the tough things about death penalty litigation and death penalty practice is that you have to unlearn everything that you've learned up until the point that you start doing it. And I had that mistake when I first started doing death penalty, because you think, okay, well, this is the way it works. This is the law. This is the procedure. Hearsay is not allowed, and this is not allowed because of this rule. But all of that goes out the window when we're talking death penalty, because you have maximum due process. So even like, for instance, certain hearsay, if hearsay is exonerating, you can overcome hearsay rules in death penalty cases because you are entitled to maximum due process, and your right to present your case overrides the evidentiary rules in the courtroom.
Wow.
And it's you have to kind of, so all of this, I'm the greatest prosecutor, I'm the greatest defense attorney, and you come in and you think, I know all this stuff and I know how to do a case, and then you have to forget it all and say new deal. And it's another mountain to climb when you get to the capital practice.
Is there a lot of burnout in capital attorneys?
Yeah, and I will say that that's one of the biggest things, that I've got a lot of baggage, psychological baggage from cases, because it is the worst of the worst. And I had to work on a multiple child killing hammer attack.
Oh, God.
Horrid case. I had a triple homicide involving a biker gang, and the worst thing is reading the families that are left behind in the sentencing phase. And then I had a case, this double homicide with these two women, and it was recorded on audio on their cell phones, and I had to listen to that over and over again. And the photos, I mean, all those dark images get into your head. And in fact, for the longest time, I really didn't really. It's not something I don't like it. Okay,
No.
and I minimized my contact. Sometimes it's hard, but you have to review these photos and videos. Same thing like the child sex crimes, which is terrible. And it's hard. These images get in your head, and it's evil and dark. I will say that there's something in Ephesians in the Bible that talks about the armor of God. And the armor of God is something that protects you from these images. And so I really lean on my faith in order to journey through this darkness and not let the evil stick and come out the other side. And although I will say that there is a cost.
Yeah.
And it's like the state does that to us. And that's
It's,
another argument against the death penalty. It's
yeah.
because
It's
there
either
is
that or you get oversensitized to it and you don't think anything of it.
right. You get a real dark sense of humor and
Yeah. Yep.
what is gallows humor, and there is that too. And it's a way to deal with it. How do you? And then people look at you like you're odd. Why are you making jokes about this? Because it's a human reaction.
You have to. Yep.
Yeah.
Same as in nursing, you have to.
And I'll
That
say
was
the death penalty cases. See, the thing about that is generally you have the most innocent victims, and that's hard. Like in a lot of like non-capital murder cases, you might have a drug dealer shootout, and so you can protect yourself psychologically as an individual by saying, well, this guy's involved in the drug trade. They should. When you got a little kid that's being
Yep.
tortured and murdered,
Yep.
you don't have that protection. You don't have the wall, so you really have to confront this evil face to face. Yeah.
I've got a question from Uda here for you, Steve. Is there any crossover Steve has regarding wartime killings and the death penalty, i.e., drone strikes? Do the areas have significant overlap?
Very good question, too. And that is addressed in death penalty debates up front, because what I do is I qualify the book as to the state imposed capital punishment scheme. Because it's
Yeah,
not
they're all
war,
different.
I exclude from that warfare and self-defense and some other issues, because those are different topics. Now, there are a lot of moral and ethical questions regarding wartime killings. However, I'm not addressing that in my book because I'm limiting it only to you've arrested somebody, they're in the jail cell rotting away. Do we execute them or do we not? And that control, because once they're in the can, now they're vulnerable to whatever the will of the people is, and that's what I'm excluding it.
It's not rehabilitative.
There's a lot of moral questions and a lot of if you're looking at it from a moral perspective, I think you need to put some thought into that, and we need to put some thought in it. But it's not covered in my death penalty series.
One of the things that sorry, Steve, you go.
Oh no, you go. No, go ahead. Yeah, no,
the things that came up for me while we were doing a bit of a deep dive into it, because we tried to look at all the different angles, from be it correctional staff to medical practitioners to the execution team to the families type of thing, because it doesn't just affect the defendant basically. So, and I discovered that medical practitioners are not allowed to be part of the process, and 7% of all death penalty executions are botched, mainly because
it's not that
they
many.
can't.
It's not that many. It's I think it's in lethal injection. I think it's 3%. I have the statistic in the
because they can't actually get an IV access.
Here it is. Yeah, there's on page 129 there. Here's the statistics right
3%,
there.
is it?
3.1% for all methods. And again, firing squad's the best. If you want a fail-safe death penalty system, do the firing squad.
I couldn't believe how many states still offer firing squad, electrocution, hanging. Like West Virginia, you can get electrocuted there still.
No, well, not West Virginia. Virginia.
Oh.
West Virginia has no death penalty, but Virginia does, and we're right next to each other. But that's one of the big differentiators, because we got rid of it, and they still have
you can still get hung.
Yeah.
Like,
yep.
Oh, hey, Miss Bendy.
That's why you don't want to go over there and do a crime.
No.
You want to come over the state line first. But now, Steve, I have a question for you. Do you believe? Obviously, I'm sure you know about the United Healthcare case with Luigi Mangione, right? So, do you believe in that case? Do you think that what is your opinion on what they're doing there? Do you think that the feds are attempting to set precedent and expanding the opportunity? I mean, again, New York doesn't have the death penalty.
Well,
but yet they're
again,
coming in and using an argument to try to insert, for the first time ever, at least according to what all the commentators are. I haven't done extensive research to see if there's other cases that they're charging a defendant with unaliving or murder or whatever
On both levels.
at the same time, at the same time, and then essentially making him fight in state court. He wins there. Now they're going to bring him in and try to take his life in federal court. So in a sense, I'm thinking in the back of my mind when I'm looking at this, is this an attempt to essentially expand the federal authority to just try to replicate this across the country and essentially open up the death penalty everywhere? Because, I mean, the feds could come in states that they don't have it and try to do this again if they get away with it. And what do you see as the constitutional issues that's going to come up with this?
It's called double jeopardy, and
Right.
there's a double jeopardy, and there is a concept involving a dual state and federal prosecution. It's called dual or separate sovereigns. So they say that in the United States we have each state is its own sovereign, and so is the federal government is also sovereign. So it's dual sovereigns. It's quite a complicated issue. I've dealt with this at the state level, where we had a federal prosecution for child sex crime. The guy got 25 years at the federal level. He was then in prison for however 20 years or whatever, and then then when the guy's 5 years from getting out or whatever it was, the state then comes back and charges him with exactly the same crimes.
Wow.
Exactly the same crimes that he pled to and got covered in the federal prison. This was my issue on appeal, and but he got 30 years in the state, so he got an additional 5 years in the state, so for the exact same crime. Now, and I had a problem with it, but yet it was allowed because a federal prosecution followed by a subsequent state prosecution is under separate sovereignty. Now, if you plea, you can cover that through plea. But in most defense, it's so rare that happens. It's so rare that, I mean, defense attorneys just don't cover it. It's just not covered, and it is very rare to do that. Why they're doing it? Because it's a high-profile case, and it's politicians wanting to say, "Look how tough they are." That's what really is going on. They're doing it because they can.
There's an impact of political influence on the death penalty as well, too, isn't there?
So you're saying the dual sovereign issue is what overrides essentially double jeopardy? Because I've wondered why the feds have come in. I mean, they do it in police cases where they'll prosecute a police officer for state charges, and then this officer beats it in state, and then they come in with civil rights violations, which are essentially under the same set of facts, except they're saying, well, this person was under, which I've always looked at it as well, that the person was an authority over someone else. So they're really dealing with the power differential there, which maybe the state charges didn't deal with. But you're saying that it's actually been held up, that they say, yeah, the feds can come in anytime. So can they do it with drug charges too, where you have both sides, same drug charge here and here, and that's all under the idea. But
well, theoretically, there's a limitation on that, in that the federal government is very narrow in their focus. So in this case, in the case that you're talking about, the guy's crossing state lines, so that involves a federal interest. A lot of times when there's federal law enforcement involved, that might be a federal interest. The problem is that the federal list of crimes they can prosecute has expanded so much that there's a lot of federal coverage now, and so when it used to be the much more narrow focus of the federal government, precluded that type of dual problem. The issue is double jeopardy, and there is case law on that says the dual sovereignty doctrine rules that. It's not really quite. It's a larger issue than death penalty. It's more of a generalized problem.
Now, do you think, though, that in the Mangione case, because it deals with the death penalty, do you think this could be a case that it could backfire on prosecutors because of the carefulness now that you've got the state? I mean, you've got a situation here where we've got a guy who has to fight. I mean, this is a situation where we're not just talking about throwing someone in jail. We're talking about a double fight. Let's just say he's found not guilty in state court, and then the federal government swoops in and says, we're going to take this man's, or attempt to take this man's life after he's been found not guilty in state court under what would, I mean, I don't know how they could even argue in a case like this.
I know that it's a separate sovereigns, and we've had that.
I mean, that's crazy.
It is
Yeah,
crazy
that's crazy.
because you are living in a state and you're also living in the United States. I think there's a lot of problems with that structurally. It just hasn't come to a head, the right case. And because it's a political case, the courts aren't usually, they don't like getting involved in political cases. They kind of let it ride. And
my assumption would be, yeah,
it is so rare that
the Supreme Court now probably would not, or the United States Supreme Court would probably not be of the makeup now to even consider overturning or making precedent in favor of double jeopardy in this instance. They would probably allow that to go forward, even if it made it.
If they were to overrule that doctrine, it would have. I would think it would be in a non-death penalty case where the facts are much more pro-defendant. Usually, death penalty cases, and this is something you got to be careful of as a defense attorney. We used to. One of the reasons the law tends to move towards the state over time is because this defendants, they appeal everything. So all these, they're in prison for life, so they just appeal. Whereas the state can back off. If they see a case, a fact pattern that is bad for them, they resolve it, they fix it. And then they only go forward to the state with very pro-state facts. And therefore the cases over time tend to be pro-state because the state is manipulating the fact cases that go forward when they're smart. And they generally are. So that's why you get over time an arc towards the state in case law. And that's a problem also. I mean, I will say it's a problem because over time it's like now everything, there's so many exceptions to every right that the rights have been eroded tremendously.
And by manipulation, are you referring to they would choose to create favorable plea deals to resolve cases they think might not stand up on
exactly
appellate issues, and that way that defendant goes away? That's always been my theory.
They can always drop the case. They can. You got a life in prison case. We'll let you plead to a third-degree felony and get probation. Take that. Right. I mean, there's a million ways that prosecutors can get rid of cases and
keep it from going up to where it could affect their ability to do business later on some of these more serious issues. So they can that one, and then the only ones that make it up is what you're saying, or the ones that are going to almost absolutely be decided in the prosecution's favor. So how do you think what do you think as an experienced appellate attorney, what reforms would you see that could help that or help resolve that issue or resolve this ability of the prosecutors to manipulate? Because it seems like that's, like you said, that's going on in cases that would potentially have an effect on even the death penalty itself, that they can do this and choose not to offer the death penalty, and then it never would go up or be a case that might be favorable to be considered. So what would you say in your experience, vast experience in this system, what do you think could be done that would be something that might help limit the prosecutor's ability to do that? Do you think there should be a restriction on plea deals?
No, I mean,
a requirement to take them to trial? What?
I don't know if this is. I don't know if this is the. As far as solutions to this particular problem, there's so many problems with the system generally that I don't know if this is the most major problem. It's a big picture, long-term, over time problem that just is just a relic of the system the way it exists. One of my ideas that I've always toy with about reforming the process that I think would be somehow helpful if we could figure out a system wherein, say, every 3 years, the defense attorneys and the prosecutors switch sides. Now maybe or a system like they have I think in England, where you show up to court and you don't know which side you're going to be on. You show up and you've got cases you're prosecuting, you got cases you're defending, because the problem is that either side, they get polarized and the other side is the enemy. And so it's like you're I'm a prosecutor, I defend the victims, and I'm putting the bad guys away, and everybody I'm prosecuting is bad and they're evil, and the end justifies the means. The process is subverted because it's justified because the bad guy. And then same thing with defense attorneys. They see bad prosecutors who are convicting innocent people, and everything becomes a war for them. It's like, oh, all these prosecutors are evil because they withheld evidence in this other case and they convicted innocent people. They're evil people, and it becomes polarizing when there's very few that have worked on both sides that are fair and balanced about their approach. And I think, and that just, it's a human nature flaw. So I think a solution to that would be to have the attorneys working on both sides in the cases. I think it might provide balance so that you don't have factions. Like we have a big problem in the state of Florida where the prosecutors dominate the jury instructions committees. And so they don't want to hear from defense attorneys about jury instructions. And so, because it's like, we want to create the law, we're going to fix the law, the standard instructions to be pro-state. And they do, and they are. And the thing is like, but if you've got to live with those same things on the other side, when you're on the other side, you might take a different take on those jury instructions, right? So I think that's one reform that I would very much be for. How to do it, I don't know. Yeah.
Now, do you think that would require remove? One of my thoughts is that one of the ideas that's always been explained to my dad when I would say, well, how do you? The state has all this money and they can come after everybody. And my dad would say, well, the presumption of innocence is the balancing factor. Yeah. Or do you think we need to look beyond that? I used to debate this with him, and because he was a big proponent. He said, oh, I somewhat agree with you. But to me, I think that it should be similar to what you're saying, but there should be a dollar for dollar opportunity for the defense to have access to all the resources on their side as the state. And that's an important balancing fact, because it's like the state has unlimited investigators. They've got unlimited experts. I know there's many times I've heard of situations to where a defendant didn't get an expert, or because they had the judge wouldn't approve a particular appointment in some cases. Or if someone has resources, maybe they don't qualify because they got to do it on their own dime, but somebody might not qualify for assistance in some cases, but yet the state still gets it. And what I'm talking about is not necessarily capital cases, but say there's a drug case where you want to have an expert test the drugs because there's an issue of whether or not they could find it. But you as a private citizen are required, I know the state's got to prove their case and you get the presumption of innocence, but unless you're willing to go put forth all these experts, I remember my dad telling me, well, the defendant didn't have the money to hire this person, or we couldn't hire, there wasn't an ability to go hire X because that person was going to cost more. So is a solution saying, hey, listen, we don't privately fund the criminal justice system anymore. We look at it as more of a commons, and the access to funding is you have a police force, but you've got the force that works on the defense side and the force that works on the state side. And like you said, a swapping of attorneys and ability to use resources fairly, because I think it's almost a resource allocation. It's unfair. It's almost gotten to the point to where the state is so at war with the presumption of innocence. They've taken away what was supposed to be an advantage by perp walking, like they did Mangione. You've got, perp walks. You've got them in some cases. Franklin Tucker case, he was telling me that the judge in that case, he said, was going to have him before the jury in his jailhouse blues trying the case allegedly. And of course, he was going pro se. I don't think an attorney would have allowed that to happen. But these were things he was being threatened with behind the scenes, like, we're going to do this and do this. And all of that to me is just at war with, like, he never has to go pro se if he had access to adequate counsel. And the system itself would never get away with some of the delays and the things that were going on if we made sure that we had, like, for instance, I noticed in the Sarah Boone case, it came up to where I think an issue for her was they were maximizing her at $14,700, and then she had like 8 attorneys, and they were actually making some of the attorneys, they were denying, the judge was having to approve extra costs above that because the judge was saying, well, it all comes out of that 14.7. So attorney 1 got like most of it, and then attorney 2, 3, and 4 and 5 are screaming in court, Judge, I'm getting nothing. I'm just getting expenses. And they were having to do extra stipends out. And I was sitting there going, how is this possible that that this is number one how attorneys are being treated, but no wonder you got these attorneys
That just
down
want you to
here
take a deal.
that just want you to take a deal, or maybe they don't. Maybe they mail it in, and you don't see much of a defense. And to me, I'm thinking, how can this be fair? But then you've got prosecutors over here where they can just pick and choose,
Well,
bring
Steve
them
actually
in,
addresses this in the
2,
book
3,
too,
4, 5, 6 prosecutors.
where he says that that you've got weakened safeguards that increase the state's power against citizens, and it erodes away the defence. And then you also have a weakened ability to defend. Can we write? To defend, something unchecked prosecutorial power.
Well, do
I
you
can't
think?
read the writing.
But
Is that
basically,
right?
the long way to my question is simply: do you think that we need to do away with the private funding of defenses? Do you think, or how do we balance that? In other words, how do we balance the lack of equity out here between the millionaire that can afford unlimited, and then they get a great defense, and then you've got the homeless guy over here who comes in and he's stuck sitting in jail, he can't bond out, and he's getting a public defender, and the resources are very limited for him to adequately defend himself. And I know you've been a public defender, so you maybe have seen what's going on that side. But
Yeah, and my perspective on that is very limited to my experience in a particular jurisdiction in Florida. All right, and
Mhm.
so and I found that our public defender's office was very good, and we had a proper allocation of funds to get experts when we thought they were required. Of course, defendants, they want experts on everything, but if we had a question about the drugs, whether they were real drugs, we'd send them off, we'd get them tested, we'd have experts on that. If we needed it, if in so, but let me, and then of course, if you've got big media cases and big high profile cases with a lot of money, then they don't have that problem either. I think the problem comes in sort of everyday folks who don't qualify for the public defender's office,
well, that's
but
what my right.
who are not rich and who are facing just sort of third and second degree felonies or serious crimes. They have to fund themselves. That's the ones that really have the problem. Now, there's also, and so the problem is not so much on the extremes of death penalty or the super poor who are public defenders. It's instead the average folks who have to fund their own defense and where the prosecutors really have an advantage. Now, another question, another little side point that I wanted to make on that is that if you saw that what was going on in that Atlanta trial with those rappers, and that Nick Starro covered,
Yeah.
gavel to gavel. There was one where basically the prosecutor's office was bankrupting all those defense attorneys, basic on abusive process, and there was no control by the judge. And how can you ever afford to do any? Those are privately funded defense attorneys, and they're supposed to sit through a year-long trial, not doing anything else but sitting in that room. Who's
I
paying
was
for that?
wondering that.
Yeah,
And the
that
witnesses are sitting there going, "No, don't know, can't
But
remember."
it's to have a year-long trial is absurd. It's an abusive process, and it's a cost imposed on the defense attorneys. I think there's defense attorneys that says, "I will never take another case." You're bankrupting them, and it's like,
Well,
these are human beings. They're there to do a job, but it's like, oh, you're defending the guilty, so to hell with you. Yeah, but this is a system, and the system cannot support that type of abuse of one of the participants in the system.
Yeah, I wondered that myself because I thought these guys are limited to the fees they're being paid in this case by these individuals, and I know from my dad's experience, criminal defendants are not always the most reliable in having unlimited funds.
Let's say you're a defense attorney. You assess this case. You're like, okay, I'll tell you what, $70,000 up front.
Yeah.
Oh, okay, that's a pretty good fee. All right, I'll take that. In most normal cases, that would fully cover whatever costs you're going to do. But in this case, you get $70,000 for all. I mean, that's just sitting in the trial. What about all the prep work? What about expert witnesses? What about? I mean, at some point, it's like you're working.
And they got to pay their secretaries, their paralegals that are helping them, and then you've got the thing that I was curious about is who's handling their other cases? Are they just are these other defendants that they're worried about? I guess they were just being told your case is on hold for a year because of who your attorney is. I mean, that's to me that was crazy. That
Did they not prioritize that in the public defender's office? Like prioritize death
what's that?
penalty cases?
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's what I was part of the capital appellate team. We had, and we only three of us when we were in the, for 1/5 of the state of Florida. So very small group of attorneys that did death penalty appeals when I was there. And then we had a trial team, a capital trial team, which I think we had 5 attorneys for a 4-county. That was a 4-county area. We had 5 capital defense attorneys. And I worked with the trial teams too, so we kind of mutually supported each other. Yeah. So the Young Thug, my opinion on that is that the outcome of that abuse, of whatever you call that ridiculous process, was not justice, because that process was so flawed. Those guys may have all done it, all right, but I have no faith in the outcome. They may have all been absolutely innocent. I have no faith in the outcome, because a year-long trial like that, there's no way a jury can sit through that and make a rational. That is such an abuse of everything. You should never have a trial that long. And they should. This is a very, very bad prosecutor. They should have broken up into individual trials, narrowed the counts, focused on the most serious things, and dumped the other stuff. For them to have this global justice for all kind of thing is just abuse. It's abuse. And I have no faith in the outcome, even though I think the only right outcome of that is for all those people to be exonerated because of the abuse. But that doesn't mean I think that they didn't do it. I have no opinion on that. I wasn't seeing, the evidence was too buried in BS, and there was too much prosecutorial misconduct. Should have been a mistrial way earlier, and the prosecutor should have kept it lean and mean. But I don't. And the process is, justice is a process, and that process was completely abused.
Well, see, what I always try to explain to people, my dad always used to, because one of the questions that I would always ask him, and that would always come from everyone else, how do you defend these people accused? And he would always say, listen, it's not about whether they did it. It's hard for you to understand that. It's about, can the state prove it, the crime that they're charging this individual with? So although that is about them doing it, but for me, it's not about whether they did it, because it's about, can the state prove they did it beyond a reasonable doubt? And do they have evidence that withstands all legal challenges coming into the trial? And then when they present it to the jury, and are there questions or doubts about this case? And if there is, because remember, a not guilty verdict is not you didn't do it. It's just there's a doubt.
Right. And this is one of the things that most people don't understand, is there's guilty beyond a reasonable doubt with legally admissible evidence. Okay.
Sorry about that. That was my son's insulin monitor.
Okay. So no, but the polarity is guilty beyond a reasonable doubt using legally admissible evidence, and then there is not to that level, right? Not to that bar. So somebody it's not guilty beyond and then innocent. That is not the dichotomy. The state bears the burden of proof to meet that hurdle. So there's a lot of cases that I had that I'd say maybe they did it, maybe they didn't. I'm 50-50. I don't know. Maybe I'm 70-30. Okay. But when I look at the case, but I'm not convinced beyond a reasonable doubt, based on the evidence before me, that the state has proven it. And so I'm comfortable letting that person go, because the evidence is insufficient. The state didn't meet its burden. That doesn't mean I think, everybody I ever represented was innocent. No, the action.
Did they not tell you? Did they not?
Sometimes I don't really care what they say. I mean, because they all lie anyway. The thing is that people, I've had, defendants, especially public defender defendants, they'll lie to you when it's in their interest to tell the truth. It's like, I say, look, here's what the evidence is, and they'll say, oh, no. And I'm like, wait a second. I'm shocked. Like, they'll lie when it hurts them. I'm like, when it hurts them, tell the truth. But so I just kind of, what they say is important. And I'm like, yes, I'm looking to what the state has.
Factual
And can
stuff.
they, and of course, your clients really do help you because oftentimes they have insights into the situation that greatly point out. Like that's why misdemeanor is so much fun because your defendants know the whole story, and the prosecutor does not. So
does like mental health and incompetency play a how does that affect death penalty completely differently or
well, wait a second. You went somewhere different than that. Okay, so does mental health affect death penalty? Yes, absolutely.
well
Yeah.
establishing adequate competency? Is there a
Well,
higher?
yes. Yeah. Well, there's the actual insanity defense, which is a very hard defense to prove,
Yeah.
and that's something called there's like something called the McNaughton rule. So not guilty by reason of insanity is quite rare. I really think there should be an option called guilty but insane. But even if regards to the not guilty thing, once you get to the penalty phase, mental health issues are mitigators. So, for example, yes, he knew it was wrong. Yes, he acted anyway. So he is guilty and insanity defense fails. However, once you get to the penalty phase, mitigation can be he was suffering from mental illness. And a great example of that is the Parkland shooter, Nicholas Cruz, who shot up the high school. And he was a victim of fetal alcohol syndrome and had major issues mentally. And that was a mitigator. The reason the jury considered that, and he was 18, I talked to two of the jurors actually on that jury. And they explained that this is the reason he got the life sentence.
Well, we had a trial. Chloe Driver was the girl that was charged with unaliving her baby, and yes, she got charged with guilty, but with a mental defect or mental illness.
I guess Georgia has a guilty but with mental defect, but as the judge pointed out,
Oh, there you go.
they really have nothing that they do except when they're in the Department of Corrections, they get medicines. Now they're mandated to get certain medicines and certain treatment plans. But Georgia's really, it doesn't give them necessarily the right to go to serve their sentence somewhere else or do something different. But it's just the idea that.
No, I don't know about that because if somebody is found insane, not guilty by reason of sin, they are committed to the state mental hospital in Florida.
Okay.
So it's not necessarily, and some of them that never get out. So it's not like the thing is that the idea here is if you're mentally ill and you commit some sort of act that would be a crime but for the mens rea, you are criminally insane. You aren't as culpable. You aren't responsible because you have an illness, and the illness you should be treated for that. Your consequences of that are you should be, the society needs to be protected from you, but you aren't the same kind of criminal as somebody who's a serial killer who enjoys killing, right? You're doing it as a consequence of your mental act. So yeah, the responsibility, and this is a big issue about educating the juries on this. They think not guilty, they're going to walk out of the courtroom. That's not what happens. Yeah.
So does the state in a not guilty, even when, okay, so I've always wondered this. So when a defendant, if they get the not guilty by reason of insanity, does the state retain jurisdiction over them for the rest of their life to make sure that they're going to follow through on their mental plans, or do
pretty much the doctors we have Chattahoochee is our mental hospital up in North Florida, and the doctors pretty much have complete control over whether they get released or not. Now there are public defenders that are there to advocate for people. They're entitled to review hearings, and we have defense attorneys who weigh in on people at these because they're being confined against their will right, and so they're entitled to a public defender. But it's really a very much doctor driven situation at that point.
So if the doctor deems them fit for release, at that point are they done with the system, or is Florida going to check back in with them? Are they required to be checked on? Because obviously, as we know with mental health issues, they can be restored, but
it depends on the situation. Depends on everything is, and this is the thing. Justice really needs to be individualized, and we have this one-trick pony solution for everything, especially states. It's like, okay, well, somebody did something bad, so lock them up in a cage for a period of time. Maybe that's the solution to every problem. And it's like sometimes, people are complicated and situations are unique. So I think that we need to really work to individualize responses. And the
Absolutely.
state doesn't have a lot of, they're really one trick ponies. They only have one tool.
Now, Steve, have you heard of? It's called they call it Prisonland. It's up in California, and California is trying a new
Disneyland.
reformative process to where this prison is, they're allowed free reign, and these are people that are charged with things like killing people. But they've tried it, and they've said that this is absolutely changed. At least it's supposedly going to expand throughout the state of California, but they've given these people a chance. Some of these people are there with life with no parole, but they have opportunities to train animals. They're doing all sorts of things where prison, like they're self-regulating themselves. Obviously, there's still the potential that if you have a prisoner in there that's just not going to be conducive to that environment. But in the overall, they've seen tremendous impacts because people are working on issues, mental health issues, things that came up from their child to try to reform themselves to come out and be better citizens, getting education. And they said, like, some of these people came from other areas of the prison system in California, and they said, when you're over there, you're just in despair. You're not working on yourself. You're not really working to try to be a better citizen. But they've seen that people coming out of what they call prisoning land, the recidivism rates so far, of course, it's not a long-term process, but that these people who are given a chance and given an opportunity to be in a more positive environment are coming out and they're not coming back. So do you think that we need to refocus corrections that as far as our focus on corrections as opposed to just warehousing people and focusing on punishment and saying, listen, when we get in there, to me, that's why my opinion is there should be life sentences, but there should be no life without parole sentences from the simple fact that every prisoner, it doesn't mean they get parole. It just means that when they're in there, they at least have some sort of something they're working towards if they want to. If not, they never achieved a parole. It doesn't even mean that they ever have the state out of their life. But that, to me, I think it makes no sense that we would just lock somebody up, because I've always believed that somebody should be living in memoriam of whoever they hurt, whether it's the person they robbed or the person they took someone's life. That why do you want in its place just to be a warehouse person, someone who's, sitting there doing nothing, if they can go do something, if this can change their life in some positive way, and at least whatever they're doing then makes their impact. And that's what I remember taking a corrections class in college, and this was a debate we had in class, and my professor was someone who was propagating this idea, and it left it with me. And I thought that's something that, to me, I think that's a huge issue in our system, is that we don't have any. I mean, to me, at least from what I see, and I watch parole hearings that are available to watch all over the country, and it just seems like to me there's just generalized resources as far as just get your GED, take some college course, but overall there isn't. It seems to be everything's focused so much on punishing the individual as opposed to reforming an individual, that we have to take back. Like, I think society forgets that. Let's give them a 25-year sentence, but guess what? We own that problem at the end of 25 years. So how do we, and again, it kind of comes into the idea of, obviously treating the lowest rung, which would be some of the people that have mental health problems. But do you think that we should have a better correctional system? Do you think we should be changing which again kind of delves into the death penalty of what the whole idea behind corrections is? Do you think that that the correction system is contradicting itself? In other words, that we're only trying to punish, we're not really trying to correct. And what do you think, in your opinion? Obviously, you've been around this, you've seen this deeper than you've actually seen inside these places and worked with these people. What do you think?
Well, I'm not sure what the question is, but
Do you think they'll ever abolish it? Do you think
Well,
we'll ever?
I don't know. I mean, there's a lot to that. I would never use California as a model. Um,
Okay.
but I will speak from my experience in the Florida correctional system.
Mhm.
Um, First of all, the state legislature has defined the primary purpose of criminal sanction is punishment. And that
Mhm.
is explicitly statutorily stated by the state
Well, actually,
legislature.
that's pretty much what I'm. So to kind of give you
Ah,
the question in a more narrow form, do you think corrections should be? Do you agree with that premise that corrections should be primarily
punishment.
based on punishment, or do you
Agree with that.
think it should be focused on reforming the individual? Because what do you think should be a more important focus? Reforming the individual that society owns at the end of their sentence, or punishing the individual without regard to the individual that shows up when that sentence is completed and then we commits another crime or goes out and victimizes another person? Do you think the system is neglecting future victims by focusing on punishment? And do you think that that should be a comprehensive reform across the country to say that we need to have
Well, I was going to
prison
say,
and
so the idea the state legislature has defined this. I think that generally it's a problem because we need to individualize and craft individual solutions for some people maybe need to be deserving of punishment. You do have the problem that you said somewhere along the line there about at some point these people will get out. So you give somebody a 5-year prison sentence and they're 28 years old, and all of a sudden at 33 years old, they're out in the society again. And did you just create somebody who's more angry, who has learned skills of criminal skills in the criminal? You haven't given him any option. I mean, have you just institutionalized them?
Yep.
So this throwaway society, this throwaway idea we have. Okay, somebody stole a car, so give them 5 years in prison, and they're 5 years in prison, and then they're out, and they're 33 years old, and now they're a felon. They have done nothing for 5 years. They haven't improved themselves. So clearly, that type of person needs to have some institutional attention. They should not be thrown away. They're human beings, and they should be. Now, my experience in Florida is that even though there is punishment as the primary, there are, and my knowledge might be a little outdated, but when I was a prosecutor, I used to go visit different institutions so that I understood where I was sending people. And
Oh dear.
and so I toured the Tomoka Correctional Institution several times, which was our local correctional institution, or local prison. There's one prison, and that's Rayford, but we call it Florida Correctional Institutions. And and I was quite impressed by the programs that they had for the inmates. Number one, there was a Christian wing. So if people did not want to participate in a lot of the gang stuff and a lot of the thuggery, and they wanted to follow a Christian path, there was there was a mechanism to do that. They grew their own food within the confines of the thing. They had crops. There was a one of the great things they do at Tomoka Correctional was they had reading books for the blind. So if you had a textbook or any kind of book and you were blind, you could send it to the institution, and they would have three prisoners, one a reader, one was an engineer, and the other was a supervisor, who would read that book into audio format
Ah,
and send it back to the blind. And they did, I think, over 1 million books in a year. I mean, it was and it was a big production thing. And those are real skills. People are reading, they're learning, they're supervising. And the administrator of that, I think, was a PhD who had killed his wife and who was in prison for life. Um, there was a program for basically creating and maintaining ambulances and other type of vehicles, fire trucks. Now that program got into a lot of trouble because it was limited to. It should have been limited to only people who had a possibility of getting out. But learning how to be a mechanic is a great skill, so
oh,
that when you leave prison, that you can
yep.
become a mechanic. It doesn't require if you're a felon, you can still be a mechanic. The problem is we had somebody who was a lifer who got into that system somehow, ended up killing and raping a prison guard, and that was a death case that our office handled.
mm,
So it needs to be controlled into who you've let into these programs, especially when you're around
Mm.
tools and physical. But all these programs did exist within this institution. And like you said, there's also things where they train service animals, which is a great thing. You take a
Oh,
stray dog and you give it, and those
yeah.
are very successful, not only in reforming the prisoner, but helping the people who need the service dogs.
Mm.
So all of these are great programs that are done within the institutions that do exist. And yes, those are very valuable. We can't just take those away because people have this throwaway. They're a criminal, throw them away. But not everything's death penalty. Not everything's life in prison. The vast majority of prisoners are in there for a short time or for some period.
Can
And
death
while
penalty inmates access those programs or not?
No, death penalty inmates are kept in solitary cells in Rayford. There's death row. We have about 300 prisoners on Florida's death row. 3 women, last I checked, and they're single cells. It's an 8x8 cell, and they're let out for 1 hour a day in a controlled environment where they can look up and see the sky through a fence, and they get a TV. They get a TV without cable. So that is the life of a prisoner, and the cells are not comfy by any means.
We had the death penalty case the other day that I shared the short with you, where it was a pro se defendant begging to have the death penalty applied because he wanted to have a single room with a TV.
Yeah, we call that trading your roommate in for a TV, because when you're in your regular prison population, and you're a lifer, you have a bunk bed. And I remember there was a case when I was prosecuting. We learned about it. I didn't handle it directly, but the other prisoner strangled and killed his roommate. Put a cigarette in his mouth, took a bloody handprint and smacked it on the thing, right? And they called that was trading your roommate in for a TV, because he's now, because
Yes.
when you go to Shamoka Correctional, they're all double cells, bunk beds, and there's one TV for the wing.
Yep.
And it's sitting up there, and it's all fuzzy and it's terrible, and it's
Yep.
on the wrap channel, and there's no way you can do it. So it's like,
Yeah.
you go to death row, you've got a single cell, no roommate, and you get a TV of your own.
This
Hey,
guy was legitimately begging for it from the judge so that he could have his private room.
well,
Because
and
he knew he was going to be there for
about
years.
10% of death row people are volunteers, 10 to 15%, which actually equates to the same pool of jurors. So there are about 15% of jurors who believe that life in prison without possibility of parole is a worse sentence than the death penalty. And the death row inmates agree with them, because about 10 to 15% of our clients are volunteers. And so, and the Supreme Court, I've argued before the Supreme Court, and they hate when we public defenders and defense attorneys say that it's their volunteers, because they want it to be scary and a threat. They want to say, you better watch out, or we're going to put you in prison. We're going to execute you. We're going to send a message.
Deterrent.
And when the person said, "Great, do it," that kind of undercuts the whole deterrence argument. So they hate it when we say that. And don't say volunteers, but that's what they are. Eileen Wuornos was a volunteer.
I've always said I thought that the death penalty would be, in my opinion, when you're faced with life, especially if someone's young, the thought of spending 50, 60 years or 40 years with no hope of getting out, or the death penalty comes and it's over with. I mean, either one, you're waiting to die. It's just, on the life without parole, it's a much longer process as opposed to the death penalty, which I guess could be at least
either way, you're coming out of the prison in a box,
Box,
right?
just a matter
so
of
it's just a matter of when.
timing. Yeah.
Yep.
But you can equate that to someone who is chronically ill as well. Whether or not they fight it and they have to live with that, or they, take things into their own hands. I was going to ask something. Have you actually witnessed a state mandated unaliving yourself?
No, I wouldn't do that.
No.
If you read my first book, the novel, my crime novel, which lays out a death penalty case from beginning, middle, and end, right?
Yeah. Yep.
Although it's slightly fictionalized, there is a real case at the center of that, and there's a lot of truth in that book. I mean, a lot of those things that I recount are actual things that I've witnessed in actual cases. In fact, most of it. In one of them, the story, if you remember in that story, there's the talk about I think it's Brother Paul, I called him. Brother Paul, who's the death row chaplain who talks. Do you remember that part? The death row chaplain comes and visits the protagonist in the thing in her prison cell, and she talks to him, and he talks to her. And in that chapter is basically word for word true with a changed name. I've met the death row chaplain, who is a Catholic lay minister, and he's witnessed over 20, I think it's 25 executions in Florida. The previous chaplain, hold on a second, the previous chaplain witnessed 4 executions. The last one he witnessed was a electrocution. Sorry, can you hear that?
Slightly.
Order in
It's
the
not a
court.
big deal.
Sorry, it's annoying. Hold on a minute.
We're total professionals here. I wonder if the outro is going to run properly today.
Okay, so restarting this. So there's a chapter in Death Penalty Desired where the death row chaplain visits the person on death row. That is a 100% true chapter.
Yep.
It's almost taken word for word from a story on the death of the actual Florida State death row chaplain. If you read that chapter, there's a very brutal part in that, and it talks about how the previous death row chaplain witnessed an electrocution where the person caught fire that chaplain was a Catholic priest and went to his parish and said, I can't do this anymore. After 4 executions, he said it was too hard on a Catholic priest.
Yeah.
Now, Brother Paul, who's in the it's actually based on a guy named Brother Dale. You can look him up, who I've met, and who's a really brilliant guy who's written multiple books on the death penalty. And he goes in there and does witness these things. And I couldn't do that. I mean, that's too hard. And in fact, I think it either impacts you tremendously or it does not. Yep. Either consequence is an argument against the death penalty, because either it destroys your spirit as a human being because you're a real human being, and watching somebody get strapped to a table and executed is an evil thing to have to witness, and it puts darkness into our world, brings darkness in our world. If you have a conscience, that should greatly affect you, right? Mm-hmm. Or you become desensitized to it and you're like, kill them all, which is also a bad effect. You know, one of the negatives, one of the anti-death penalty arguments is that the effects of the people that are involved in the system cannot be measured. And it's a hard thing. The spiritual, the judges, the bailiffs, the prison guards, because a lot of these prison guards have the same thing. I mean, they have to deal with these people every day, and they become humans.
They develop a relationship with them because they're there for so long.
Right. So so this is a major consequence of a death penalty system that should not be there. We should not be doing this to people. I mean, they're stuck in a cell in a cage for the rest of their life.
Yep.
And then at some point, 20, 30 years down the road, we're going to haul them out of the cage and strap them down and inject them with poison.
Yep.
Really?
And they've changed the cocktail now too. They've changed weird. The medicines.
Well, there are problems with that, but anyway, yeah.
I agree. I think it's a direct, like I said, I think it's a direct contradiction of just what we should be looking at. In other words, we hold as the highest possible crime in most, in all, is killing someone, and yet we forget to live by example. And I've always said we're society is defined by how it treats its worst. Mm-hmm. So when we're killing our worst, we're as bad as the people that we're prosecuting in giving it.
It's tough
as opposed to showing an example and saying, listen, this person shouldn't have killed a person, and we understand this person did the absolute worst, but we're not going to kill you. Well, you're going to have to live with it. You're going to work in memoriam of this individual, and that's what I was saying. It's, to me, I think that person should be required to have the opportunity to do good things, like read to the blind and do things of that nature. Like you said, that's really awesome that they do, or that
Now
they
those
do
aren't
that.
death row.
That's
Those aren't
amazing.
death row inmates.
No.
Those are mostly.
Well,
They are
I think that if they were lifers, then they wouldn't be death. They would potentially have the opportunity to work towards that. But I think also too, would you now in Florida, would you agree with the sentiment? I mean, from my opinion, in studying criminology and looking at the criminal mind, a majority of individuals, in my opinion, you will find that there are substantial personality defects or problems, traumas in their life that have more likely than not led them down the road that's landed them to prison. So do you believe that it
absolutely.
should be just mandated that they go through psychological, that they're given mental health support? It's not even an option. I mean, they're in custody. So it should be, you're showing up, you're going to
address that comment.
address that.
That one?
Mhm.
Yeah, I'm sorry, it's Melissa here.
Mhm.
Okay, I want to talk. I have an uncle who worked for 40 years as a correctional officer in Volusia County, Florida. That Shamoka Correctional Institution, the one I'm talking about, is in Volusia County, Florida. That is my jurisdiction. I worked in Volusia. I was born and raised in Volusia County, Florida.
Mhm.
And he says murderers can be some of the friendliest people until they're not. And again, another.
Melissa, you're killing me.
Well, the truth in my first book, and if you remember the eunuch was one of my anti-heroes, kind of a heroic
I
figure.
have to admit, I cheated. I threw the book into an AI voice and I listened to it.
Okay, well,
and this Stephen and Gosney appeared a lot of the time.
Well, the eunuch, he says, can be the friendliest people until they're not. There were some things that he said, which were said to me by some prisoners, that when I went and visited Volusia County, Florida, I talked to some of the inmates, right? I've toured it 3 times. It was really one of the most interesting things I've done. And I remember talking to this one guy, and he was he was in prison for life. And he said, and if the eunuch says this, but it was based on actual conversations I had with this lifer. And he says, and I'm talking to him. He's a really nice guy. It's like you're talking to him, just a conversation,
Yeah.
very likable, and of course you eventually you talk to him. You're like, now, what are you here for again? And it's like, well, attempted murder and this sort of thing. And I'm like, and I was like, well, how is it that you're here, right? I mean, it seemed like such a nice guy. And he's like, well, he says, I love cocaine. I love cocaine. And he's like, and if I get out, I will do cocaine. And when I'm on cocaine, I'm a murderer.
Wow.
Holy cow. Wow.
Yeah,
Wow.
and so he's like, so it's better than I'm
He
here.
owned it. He owned it.
He's like, it's better than
Wow.
I'm here, because if I get out, because he says, I know I love cocaine and I will get out, I will do cocaine. And when I'm on cocaine, I'm murderer. And so, it's like,
Wow.
when I'm not on cocaine, I'm fine. And so it's like, that was quite an interesting, and if you see the eunuch as that same, in the character in my first novel, in my crime novel, he talks about that. He's like, I love cocaine.
She had everything happen to her, didn't she? You addressed everything from Miranda rights to all the way through. Every problem, every issue.
So, I mean, it sounds like he had and again, that's interesting that he, as someone who's saying, I belong in an institution, and that he had the self, I guess the self-realization of understanding that. Now, to me, what I have said is, I think one of the things that the state gives up, which, again, I don't know, maybe it's unconstitutional, they can even use the data in this way. But to me, we have all these prisoners warehouse, and one of the ways of trying to figure out how to, understand why these things happen, maybe even prevent things to a degree, or deal with, or look at trends of prisoners as they're coming through the system early on and identifying like these things were present and how can we help people before it gets so bad, would be to allow these people access to mental health, and then allow the state, whoever's this, the state mandated therapists, counselors, psychiatrists, to then share that data in a constructive way, still maybe keeping the prisoners' identities, out of it, and not identifying it, but being able to share the trends and really look into the minds of these criminals, because it's like this guy with the cocaine issue, it would be
Why don't
very
they study
interesting to
them?
understand what is it in his mind that causes him when he gets on cocaine to become murderous. Like, is there some? There's got to be more to that, maybe that is tying that in. But how do we understand that? I mean, we got a guy in there that he's like we have the opportunity to understand this, because I bet you there might be someone else out there that maybe has similar situations who hasn't done something yet, but we could look at his history,
learn
look at
from
the
them.
things, and learn from them, especially if we require every time they enter the system to go through extensive mental health stuff in order to get out, and making that, a proponent of parole and getting out. And then you can have this opportunity to be like, okay, these are the things we're looking for, and these are the things we can maybe correct and get in front of and address these traumas, which I know, when I talk about this with people, a lot of people get upset because they're like, well, why should they get that? But I'm out here and I haven't committed a crime, and I don't get access to free mental health. I don't get access to, but to me, it's like, well, we don't want this person to be dangerous when they come out with us. And I think it would be important information that everybody would start to understand, in helping to understand why these people are doing what they're doing.
There's a lot. You're throwing a lot of stuff out here, and I need to. There's so many things I can say, and so many places I can go.
Oh,
I will say that the fact that the assumption that the people can be treated is questionable. I will say that when we land in the criminal justice system, the damage and the trauma, and we're sort of at the bottom. We've already reached the bottom of where we are. I think Jody was saying that the people that like commit murder, the last appeal that I did, the last death penalty appeal I did, when you look at the mitigation phase and what the guy had been through as a child, you get to the point, it's like, how did he not commit murder before this? I know that's sort of an odd thing to say, but when you read the mitigation and what the childhood and what the life that some of these people have had up to the point where they committed a murder, it's unbelievable. And it's like, how do people even survive to the point where they can commit the murder?
I think that's what Steve was talking about,
Yeah.
assessing that.
So,
and that's to me where I'm saying that, if we are able to start to like, if this individual, I don't know what that guy's, obviously what that person's history is, but did he have contact? Was he having contact with the criminal justice system, in the sense that maybe some of these things could have been addressed at different stages, and instead of just punishing him in a cell? I mean, you put someone with trauma in a cell and get them angrier and madder, you're just looking for exactly what happened with this guy. He goes out and kills somebody.
Well, but you see that the research has been done on this. There is a lot of research on this, and there is a lot of. I don't think I don't think that there's a void of information.
Have you recommend anything to read?
Well, let's talk about the causes of first degree murder, and we're talking death penalty, and there's criminality is a more general thing, but I think they're similar. One is that most murders are without purpose. And that's hard for people to understand that. Number one, that means that almost without exception, the bases for the cause, the motives, are very primal, very irrational. And so for us to think that there's some preventative mechanism, because we're human beings and we have primal kind of lizard brains and base. And so, for example, I would say most murders are caused by several factors. One would be drugs, mainly cocaine. I call cocaine the murder drug. I've seen in about 80%, 85% of the murders I've seen, cocaine has been present. Now,
is that the methamphetamine? You call it different to
cocaine.
us.
No, cocaine, not methamphetamine. Okay, so and it basically, and I would see it's present in about 80 to 85% of the murders that I've been involved with or I've understood, which is alarming. Now, it doesn't mean it's motive. It just means that they are doing it or it's involved. Okay, now I have some theories about why that may be. Second thing is there's mental illness. There's IQ. There's low functioning people who don't understand the world and are operating at a low level. And then another factor that is very important is just primal territoriality, primal respect, rules of the street kind of stuff. So like I remember the triple homicide on the Warlocks biker gang I mentioned earlier. It was like, why did this one biker gang gun down the other biker gang, killed 3 people? Why did they do it?
Mhm.
Well, because they're disrespecting us, right? They're coming here, and it's like, really? And the victims didn't even, there's 2 warlock gangs, and they didn't even understand. They were like, they thought they were on their own things, like a poker run or something up in Sanford. They didn't even know what was coming. They're just riding up, and all of a sudden they get gunned down. It's like, why? What? And so when you look at it, it's like, it's so stupid and irrational. But to the perpetrator, like they're coming and invading. It's like, it's a territoriality thing. Same thing, like you get a lot of honor killings. Like, that guy looked at me wrong. He disrespected me. And to
Past trauma.
the rules of the street are that if you let somebody disrespect you, you're going to be the victim. Right. And we don't understand that like, we wouldn't survive in these situations. We're outside of that criminal kind of bases. And then, of course, drugs are huge, especially cocaine. And my theory on cocaine is that it basically burns out your pleasure centers. So you have, things in your brain, little receptors that give you pleasure. And most of the things that you and I might find pleasure in, like, things that are important, seeing our child grow, having a success at work, or getting, buying a new thing, or getting a house or something,
Getting monetized.
or getting married, having a relationship, all the things that give you happiness.
Yep.
All right. Well, what if all of those things were taken away? What if all of your pleasure centers, those things give you no pleasure? The only thing in life that can give you pleasure is this drug. Then people become an impediment, a barrier between you and pleasure. And so the things I've seen, I remember a case we had. It wasn't my case. It was a case in the prosecutor's office where a guy was on cocaine, and he basically murdered 2 elderly people in their bedroom, robbing them for money. And he just crushed their heads, and it was terrible. And it's like, because they're just in the way. It's like, that's the thing. Like they'll hold somebody up at an ATM. Give me your money. And if the person doesn't immediately fork it, they kill them because they want the money. You're just in the way. It's like, because you're in the way of me having any pleasure or any relationship at all. And it's different. Whereas like pills, we talk about, oxycodone pills were a big problem for a while, and I dealt with those. Those people are in pain. And so what they would do is they're robbing the guy, and they're like, just give me the things. I don't want to hurt you. I don't want to hurt you. I'm just in pain. I need this drug in order to get me out of pain. Whereas cocaine has this opposite thing. It's like, I've burned out my soul and my humanity when I've overdone cocaine so much that my pleasure centers are burned out, that you're just in the way. And I know that's sort of.
So you're trying to rationalize something that's totally irrational anyway.
I'm just trying to explain
a square in a round hole.
Why is it that this cocaine is present in about 85% of my murders I've dealt with? So that's the best. I mean, and that's simply
that's a very good explanation. I mean, that's actually a very compelling explanation as far as what you shared there.
And same way, this guy that was in the prison that I talked to, he's like, I love cocaine. And I don't care about any people, and I want, because he wants pleasure. He wants some fulfillment in life. The only thing that he knows what that is. And I actually had an experience.
Guaranteed.
I had an experience about that too, but I'll let you next question. Not cocaine, but I'm
so what you're saying is that you believe that in this case of this individual, that basically he was willing to, was he killing people for access to cocaine? Is that kind of what he was saying? That it came up to where?
No.
Well, it was. He was eventually arrested and put in prison for attempted. Somebody stole his car, and he had gotten a gun, and he was going up to confront the guy that stole his car to kill him.
Oh, okay.
And he was intercepted on the way but he was just like, because people have no value. People provide no pleasure. There's no joy of interaction with people. People are in the way. I mean, when you've burned out your brain to the point that nothing gives you pleasure. I'm trying to rationalize that. That's my best explanation. And this is a little bit uneducated. I will say it's not educated by academic research, which a lot of my work is, but it's my observation from personal experience and trying to explain why is it that I see this drug at the center of a lot of
Yeah.
murder. And I mean, even cases, like I said, that people kill, and it's not necessarily it has an effect on the brain that has to be somehow explained.
Now, Steve, you touched on earlier. You said that there is a large amount of, I guess, uh, research on I guess on the causes of criminality and the ability of whether or not someone could be reformed. However, has it ever been tried that you know of in a state? I mean, one of the things I'm saying is it's never been, to my knowledge, at least as I've looked out and looked around, I don't think any state's ever said, let's take our entire correction system and provide every prisoner with a mental health evaluation in terms of, or not mental health evaluation, but mental health help, and require them into therapy and look at them and then follow these prisoners over a period of time long
Sure.
enough to say, hey, is recidivism going down when we
Sure,
do
they
this,
have.
or is it
This
going
is
up?
no,
Have they?
absolutely,
Okay.
they have, and that's
Okay.
the European model. You're advocating
Okay.
for the
European
European
model.
model.
Gotcha. Okay. Okay. And in Europe, is recidivism rates lower in Europe than in the United States? Do you know offhand?
I don't know that. I don't know that, but that
Okay.
is the European model, which emphasizes reform over. Yeah, he says my story. Yeah, you can imagine actually being there. Yeah, that's great, Melissa. We probably could swap some stories. I, I had. It's funny. I was robbed when I was young. I was involved in the pool and brew, and a robbery involving a murder. And I was a bass player for a band, and we played at this club. And 45 minutes earlier, these two guys. One of them was named Little Goat, and the other one I forget. They're two crackheads, cocaine, and their mo was to rob bars, which is a stupid place to rob because there's a bunch of drunks closing out the bar. And the 45 minutes earlier, they had robbed this place called the Pool and Brew in Port Orange, and they came in with their guns, and the people started throwing pool balls at them. And as they were fleeing, one guy was chasing them, and the Little Goat put his rifle and shot the guy in the heart and killed him.
Oh.
And then they came 45 minutes later. He came down to my bar in Ormond Beach, and we were playing and we were closing. I'd just gotten paid, and these two guys were robbing the bar. And it's interesting because those guys went to prison for life, and Little Goat is now in the Tomoka Correctional Institution. And when I was writing the book, I actually wrote to him and said, and I wrote to him because, of course, I wrote to him, it's like, look, I'm an appellate lawyer in Volusia County, right? And he starts telling me all this BS, like, oh, I thought so. He had been, it's like, and anyway, once I told him, I said, look, I'm not going to here to help you. I'm just going to know what the hell you were thinking at that time. What, just to kind of reach out as far as like, what was your side of the story? Because this is my understanding. And he pretty much confirmed it. I mean, they were crackheads and they were
Yep.
drugs, but he's in Tomoka Correctional. I was going to interview him. It was actually for I was going to do that because I was talking about criminal law with my buddy Mark Bernier, who was a radio talk show host in Volusia County, and so I was going to go out and interview him. But once they learned that I was a victim of his crimes, they wouldn't let me see him. I could write him, but they wouldn't let me see him because I might be wanting revenge on him, right? So.
All right. Well, do you want to give us a quick overview of the 3 books again for us, Steve? We've probably kept you further than we planned.
Sure, no problem. Yeah, I don't know how much book stuff we've talked about.
The
All my
third one
books.
we haven't touched on, so if you want to go through that one, that'd be.
Well, let's just talk about what they are. They're all available at stevegosney.com.
Yep,
which is
down
right
the
up
bottom.
there. And then and also they're all available on Amazon. I know we have Australian here, and there's a lot of interest in the death penalty outside the United States because it's the death penalty is unusual for a civilized Western country to have. The U.S. is very unique in that regards.
Yeah, we
Americans,
abolished 84, I think.
Americans don't care. They don't care what the world does. But I will say that I don't like being the only country in the civilized world that has a death penalty. I think that's an argument against it. And most of the world looks at us like strange, like, why do you have it? It causes international relation problems, actually. Not that Americans care, but it is an argument against the death penalty. And I don't know, I've written 3 books to fully understand it top to bottom.
Yep.
The first book is called Death Penalty Desired, Passion and Murder. And that is a crime novel that takes it from a double homicide, an investigation, a death penalty trial, and then a tour through death row. And it's told through a fictional context, but like I was telling you, a lot of the stories are true, based on true crime, based on true incidents, things that I've seen in the prosecutor's office, I've seen in defense lawyers. Almost everything has a direct analog to a real experience I've had.
The defendant banging the attorney.
Well, that was I put a. Which one are you talking about? Which I don't.
Amanda, wasn't it? Is it Amanda?
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, and it was part of that was a joke because, I told a story about this. I was just getting done with a death penalty appeal, and so much work. And I had another case, the Virgilio Aguilar Mendez case, which was a wrongfully accused migrant in St. Johns County who was accused of second-degree murder. And he was actually innocent. It's the most innocent client I've ever represented. And he was
second degree is eligible for death penalty as well?
No, only first degree.
I didn't think so. Yeah.
So if you want to look that case up, it was one of the big cases of my career. It's the Virgilio Aguilar. Anyway, these 2 cases resolved right at the same time, and I went from like full amping, work mode into relaxation. I was on the Vice Squad, Legal Vices, and I was talking, and somebody said you should write a book called Death Penalty Desires, and have like the more I thought about it, the funnier it became, because I'm like the hero appellate lawyer, right? He's the studly guy, and I'm like, never is there a hero appellate lawyer. I mean, that's like right? It's always the cool trial guys.
Yeah.
So the more I thought about, the funnier it became, and then of course the main character is Amanda, and Amanda was based on a real client I had, and that it always bothered me, that case, because it was an actually innocent person that went to prison for 10 years.
Yep.
And she was a very submissive, agreeable woman that was my client in a real case. And she went to prison for 10 years. And, most of our clients are very disagreeable people. They're very, anti. And so for this woman who's agreeable, like, how did she end up in prison? And it always bothered me. So I took the main character, that trial, and that is that trial that I did, which was the actually innocent person, which is very close to that trial.
Yep.
And I converted it into a death penalty, but also it's contemplation, like, she's so submissive. And so I put that in there to make the hero studly defense attorney, it's the silly thing, to make a love story in the middle of it. Because it's puzzling how somebody like that could end up in prison. So basically everybody
from the start, and every error that could have happened along the way.
And she kind of starts out as a not likable person too, I think. I think she starts out as kind of like a self-centered, entitled, and there's an evolution where she starts to stand up for herself, and she starts to gain some confidence in herself. Anyway, there's a little of that.
I must say, I did like the mention of the sacred feminine in there.
Yeah. Well, it is an evolution about women too, and about having their values, because when she starts out, she's very self-centered, very interested in surface things. And a lot of women make that deal. They marry some guy who they maybe kind of, but he provides for her. And she's very, like, and the cell phone case, the sparkly cell phone case is kind of symbolic of that. Right. And then, of course, there you go. But then at the end, when she's at the end, she tosses it. So it's not important. So her value system has changed.
Yep.
And I think the values change that occur. There's a big arc on Amanda, and I think it came out pretty good on that. Many people disagree, but
I must say I probably more enjoy the legal side of stuff. So I enjoyed debates a lot more, and I'm hanging to get to the third one.
Well, debates is so that's the first book, is Death Penalty Desired. The second book, and that's to give you a factual framework so that you can understand when I start talking about the debates in the next two books, you have a fact pattern that you can rely on, which is using real law and real legal situations so that you go, oh, I remember that issue. That was okay. And then the second book is a public policy debate. So a lot of times when I'm doing legal appeals, the public policy debate is separate from my legal arguments. So, it may be wrong in policy, but constitutional and legal. So it may be bad public policy, but legal. And it could be good public policy and illegal. So the public policy is separate from the legal debate. So the second book is called Death Penalty Debates, and that is net positive or net negative. And what I did was, because when everybody knows me as this death penalty guy and I do this stuff and this is my expertise. So, but everybody wants to tell me what their opinion is on it. They don't want to really want to hear what I have to say. They're like, let me tell you what I think. And they won't agree or respond, or they think you want to corner me or something, right? So I just started listening to people. And I say, okay, what's your best argument? And I just, on pro or con. So I just started for like a year or two, I was just listening to everybody's arguments and then cataloging them on both sides. And that's what this book is. It's a catalog of issues along with examples that people use. So here's the issues, here's the examples that they use on either side, and then put it in the scale and you weigh for yourself, because so many people want to tell you what to think. Instead, I'm identifying the issues, identifying the examples on both sides. You put them in your own little scale and you weigh for yourself whether you think it's a net positive or net negative.
I like how you asked the question. You're asking the right question.
Right. And it's because you don't have the ability to influence it other than for or against as a public policy, because it's not a question of like, I get to pick who goes to death row. No, you get to empower the state with the power to make this decision for you. So you're empowering it on both sides. And so you need to understand it's a public policy question. So that's the second book. And that one is very popular. And like you said, a lot of people like it. It's a really, not a hard read. It's a short read. It's on audiobook too, and it's available on Amazon.
I heard that one too.
All these books are on Amazon also. And internationally, if you're international, get it. And then the third one is Death Penalty Designs. And this is my latest book, Maximum Due Process. So this is the legal arguments. So this is basically giving you a history of the death penalty, a history of the legal framework of the death penalty within Florida and within the United States, beginning with Furman and then re-implementing with Gregg, and then going forward and identifying issues that surround the death penalty currently, along with attacks on the Florida death penalty, which is wrong on many fronts, but it outlines all the legal arguments that are against the death penalty, aside from the public policy arguments. So, like I said, it could be good public policy, but unconstitutional. So those are the three, and I think they're all available. You said you had trouble in Amazon getting.
You have to. The reason I told you was that I don't know if Amazon tells you what stock levels there are, or do you have to provide the stock, or
they're print on demand?
Okay, because they said it was out of stock.
I don't understand that.
Yeah,
it's printed. Make sure you get it, because there's a lot of different.
Got it. I downloaded it from your site.
Okay, well, it's ultimately available for me if you want.
Down the bottom, SteveGosney.com. He's got.
If you get them for me, I'll sign them for you. Yeah. So, anyways, that's kind of what the book's, and it's a neat little set. There's nothing like it.
Oh, look, I didn't feel like you'd left a stone unturned. It was amazing.
And I've been on all sides of it. This is the thing. I've been, and so most people don't have the because again, in the debates, for example, most people have one or two arguments for and one or two arguments against. They have counter arguments. They say, oh, well, the reason and that's about it. And they don't really think about it deeply. And I didn't think about it deeply. I mean, it's not, and ultimately, it's not the number one issue in the world. Here I am cutting, because if they killed everybody on death row tomorrow, all the problems would exist still in the states. The crime problem and all the issues still exist. If they went and granted clemency to everybody, which Biden did in the federal level almost, it doesn't solve the underlying problems. So it's a little bit of a politician distraction from addressing real problems that confront us as human beings in our society.
And I think you mentioned something too about the politicians adding more factors to be included, like as far as determining the difference between a death penalty case and a non, and the more that they add makes them more of a blanket cover again, which makes them more arbitrary and unconstitutional. So it's
Exactly.
this vicious cycle that
Mhm.
just continues.
And then politically, of course, you understand this. So, there's somebody that's murdered, justice for Kaylee or something, right? Or there's some crime.
Mhm.
And I'm a politician and I'm the tough on crime
Yeah,
politician. And so it's like, well, that
let's add
person
that.
should be killed. Whatever you say, I can outdo you by being for the death penalty because that's the ultimate sanction, right? So then you add and you add and you add and you add,
Yep.
and then everything is subject to the death penalty.
Yep.
And then it's like,
Becomes
and then
arbitrary
it's
again.
arbitrary.
Yeah.
So it becomes, it's sort of this, like I said, if you want to make the strongest
Ultimate
aggravator system
victims.
would be 2 victims because it's objective.
Clean cut.
There's one, and it also provides. You talk about incentive structures, and what is it? Deterrence is a big argument, and I address deterrence on both sides. Deterrence, if you really want to deter, I would say that's the best deterrent factor because people would know in their head, they'd say, okay, I killed one person, but if I kill the cop who comes to rescue or comes to arrest me, that's a double homicide. Now I'm subject to the death penalty. So there, if it's actually a deterrent, which it's not, but assuming if you believe deterrence is, then that would be actual deterrence. And that would be go towards that idea. I would say that there is an exception on the specific deterrence. If you read the book, general deterrence has absolutely been proven it does not work. There is no general deterrent for the death penalty. There are, but I have imagined and I do believe there is specific deterrence in specific cases, and there can be. And therefore, that's why the double homicide aggravator would work, because I think it would make more of a general deterrence argument when you only have that one factor. When you have 20 factors, do you think criminals are studying the 20 aggravators before they murder? No.
Well, that's my whole issue with the deterrence thing is these criminals are not Googling the
No.
crime they're about to commit and going,
Yeah.
"Oh my gosh, wow, I better not do that." Like you said, most of these crimes are done in
They
the
don't
moment.
think down the
Well,
They're
road.
done
that's
in
what I'm saying.
reaction to something else. They're on drugs. They're not thinking about anything other than their
Well,
their present moment.
this is one of the major flaws in why people think it's a deterrent, and it's a general deterrent, and it's not, because the motive for crime, the way I've expressed it, is cocaine, is territoriality and irrational lizard brain behavior, or it's mental illness. None of those things are subject to deterrence. All of those are irrational motives, and so those people are not deterred. So, it's like it does not work because the primary
Now,
motivations for murder are not addressed
Rational.
by rational, right?
now, would you not agree too as well that obviously you're dealing with death penalty in this instance, but in general, over sentencing someone for deterrence purposes doesn't work even down the line on lower type crimes. Maybe like white collar crimes where someone's in an office situation and they're determined that that person might make a determination before I steal this money. But say drug related crimes, I mean, I've always found that ridiculous when they were sentencing people to 40 years or sentencing somebody to 40 years for drug possession or selling drugs. And a lot of times, at least around here, the people selling drugs were using drugs, and the purpose of them selling drugs was because they were trying to get money to
Pay for drugs.
use drugs. And it was all really just a group of people using drugs, and then that's how the feds come in or the state will come in and determine a drug conspiracy. But it was really a conspiracy of users. So these people were doing it rather than go rob a bank, they decided, well, let's just get together and sell drugs to the people and raise money that way. So it's like, well, let's deter them from doing that. And then we end up with what you're talking about, where they go out and they decide in a cocaine induced brain to go rob somebody, but they go further and kill somebody. So to me, I think that deterrence, even down the line for arguing it as, when you're looking at criminality, and then you get into stealing, a lot of times it's drugs. And then I remember one of my professors making the argument that was saying poverty is a huge driver, but the guy that's impoverished, who's making a decision, am I going to steal for purposes of putting food on my table? They're not worried about that at that moment. They're worried about going in and getting the bread for their kid. as opposed to saying, well, I might go to prison for 20 years. They're willing to take the risk. So it's not going to deter them. They're just going to go do it. And many of them, I don't think they're ever going to get caught, or they have some sort of, like, it's not factoring in
spontaneous
in these things. Yeah. So I think,
there is you could have an endless conversation on this topic, absolutely endless, and we could talk for hours, but we probably need to wind it up. And thank you very, very, very much for joining us.
Thank you for coming.
Parting your wisdom. Do go out and have a look at those books and have a read. SteveGosney.com. They're all available on there, and I personally recommend them. They're amazing. They opened my eyes, and I've watched a lot of trials.
Thank you. Yeah, if it's a subject matter that interests you,
it does.
Then these 3 books. I mean, I've written 10 books, but not all of them are law related. So there's Prepare, the Handbook for Individual Freedom, Developing the Ideal Christian Mindset, which is kind of my close book. There's Ideas and Answers in Law, which addresses non-death penalty but more criminal justice issues. There's Brucey the One-Eyed Wonder Dog coloring book, which is my children's book. There's The Summer Friend. There's a book for middle schoolers, because middle schoolers don't have a lot of good reads that are moral. So The Summer Friend is a short middle schooler read about growing up in Daytona Beach, Florida, and true story. And then, and so anyway, go there and check out all my books. And I thank you for having me on. It's been.
You're very, very welcome. Thank you very much. And yes, John, it has been interesting. And I didn't think it was as interesting before I read them.
So to wrap this up, Steve, I know you said that death penalty work and all of this has been in your past. So leave us with, where are you at now? What's the future look like for Steve Gosney? What are you into now? And is there any other ways besides buying your books that we can support whatever you're doing?
Well, that's pretty much it at this point. I mean, it's a long story, which we'll have to deal with some other time. I'm doing civil litigation now, mostly criminal. I'm doing trucking defense, a lot of transportation defense work. So I'm doing civil world right for now.
That's a big change.
Yes, big change. Kind of like what I said, I did a 20-year interim so that I could learn trials, and now I'm doing civil again. It's a long story, but anyway, just go to stevegosney.com. I do have a Rumble and YouTube channel.
YouTube channel link is on the bottom as well.
Which there's a lot of content, especially on the Rumble stuff. There's a lot of content going back where I've interviewed experts. I've interviewed, like I said, Herman Lindsay, who was on death row, who was exonerated. I've interviewed Chris Fabricant, who is the director of the Innocence Project, litigation director for the Innocence Project. I've interviewed a fellow who's an expert, Dr. DeClue, on false confessions. I've interviewed Shane Turledge, who's an expert on fingerprints. I interviewed Tiffany Roy, who's an expert on DNA. A lot of really interesting content. There's music content. There's content on faith,
and I think I watched a stream that you did with Valhalla Awaits, where it was you're quite fond of a sidecar.
Yeah, well, it's funny. Yeah, everybody, that's the drink of the day,
That was funny.
Thank you.
And I dropped your Rumble. I dropped Steve's Rumble link in the chat. So if you guys want to head over and check that out.
Thank you, Tricia. Thank you all for being here, chat. Thank you very, very much. And you did keep it nice. Good on you. Thanks again. Well, I don't know how we're going to top that one, Steve, in a fortnight, but we shall try. All right. Thanks again. And
thank you, everyone.
Stay safe. Bye.